Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Welcome to Resilience and Resolve. I'm Evan Mack. I'm here with tax attorney Lance Drury. Today we're talking about a hidden danger in tax debt, interest and penalties. How are they calculated? How fast do they grow? And what can you do to stop the spiral? Welcome, the best dressed man in the Midwest, Lance Drury. What's going on, baby?
Evan, I thought that was you.
Listen, well, I'm in Pennsylvania, so technically,
okay. Well, that's not really in the Midwest.
You can have the Midwest title. I will take the the East Coast.
I'll settle for that.
So let's talk about this penalty interest. What is the difference between IRS interest and IRS penalties?
Well, the difference is they're going to charge you interest on your IRS debt, just like the bank does. You know, they consider it a loan. It's tied to the prime rate, so it varies all the time. But the penalties are separate, and there's different types of penalties. The two most common are a penalty for failure to pay, and then there's also a penalty for failure to file. Now, the failure to file penalty, and that means filing your tax return, for every month that it is late, it's 5% of the raw tax. And it maxes out at 25% of the raw tax after 5 months. The rate for the penalty for failure to pay is half of 1%, but once you have an agreement, that's reduced in half. So, for example, I got a client that I talked to today, a potential client. He owes $80,000, but guess what? The returns were filed late. So that $80,000 before the failure to pay penalty and before interest is now $100,000 simply because of the failure to file penalty. So here's a hint for people, because this happens all the time. They'll prepare the return, they can file it timely, but they don't have the money to pay off the tax liability, so they don't file the return. Huge mistake, because they're just adding, after 5 months, an additional 25% to the raw tax for the failure to file penalty, and that's before the other penalties. So even if you can't pay, it's always, the best thing is always to do is to file that tax return on time, so you don't incur the failure to file penalty.
So when do these charges start exactly, Lance?
Well, they start when the tax is assessed, and the tax is assessed once it's filed and processed. And so that's when the penalties and the interest continue to accrue. And I got to tell you, Evan, if you and I charged what the IRS charges in penalties and interest, we'd be in the federal clink. I mean, it's outlandish what these penalties are. I got a guy now, and it's because he did not submit a Form 1095 in 16 and 17, which is the medical insurance. And he thought they had been filed by his accountant, and they don't owe any tax for those years. But for 16 alone, he has been assessed over $1 million in that penalty for failure to file that Form 1095. And they expect the same thing is going to happen to 2017. But we've got some arguments. We hope we can certainly help them out. And this is unbelievable. But this guy called me from New York, had Googled me. He had already had representation in New York, but he found out about the firm and he called us. And we don't even, we don't advertise in New York. We don't have an office in New York. So, but that's how horrendous some of these penalties are. And some of them are just totally unreasonable and arbitrary. And so we're hopeful that we're going to be able to help him out.
Do you know how they calculate these unreasonable prices? Is they just throwing something at a dartboard? Is it case by case? How do they calculate this, in your opinion?
Well, I really can't tell you offhand for that particular one. That's the first time in all my years I've ever seen that penalty for failing to fail the medical insurance form with the tax return. So I can't tell you for sure what that is or how it differs from some of the other penalties, but they're totally ridiculous. And so we see that from time to time. It's not common, not like the failure to pay or the failure to file, but it does happen, and it's just totally ridiculous.
So can the interest and penalties, can they increase?
Oh, they increase all the time. From the date the tax is assessed, you're getting increased the percentages that I told you about at the beginning for both the penalties for failure to pay and the interest every single day. And even if you get a client into currently non-collectible, which we discussed, Evan, in one of these earlier episodes, the penalties and the interest don't stop. They have one less day every day that you're in currently uncollectible status to collect the tax, but the penalties and the interest continue to accrue. The good thing is, if we put somebody in currently non-collectible, normally they're on a fixed income or they don't make a lot of money and they don't have the ability in the future to get a job that's going to increase their income. So it doesn't matter because eventually we're going to run out the clock on collections.
So what about ways to reduce or eliminate them? Do you have is there any like methods that do that, or is just kind of stuck?
Well, for the penalties for failure to file, we can get those kicked in U.S. tax court. There's first-time penalty abatement. A lot of times you can get that stuff kicked, although we're now finding it harder. It used to be 100%. Now they're only willing to settle for about 50%. The failure to pay penalty, there's first-time penalty abatement. But if you want it to get kicked otherwise, you have to show reasonable cause. And the most common is that it's, injury, medical problems, you had surgery, you were hospitalized. So that's the most common way that we can get those penalties kicked for reasonable cause.
Do extensions or filing an extension, does it stop penalties and interest from accruing, or does that keep going even if you file that?
Well, the failure to file penalty does not accrue. What people have to remember about the extension that you file in April so that you can go to October is that extension is only good for the filing of the tax return. It is not an extension to pay the tax. So if you owe the tax and you can pretty well ballpark how much you're going to owe, you should send in the check for your tax liability in April so that you buy the time to file the return so that the failure to file penalty doesn't accrue, but they've already been given their money. Because if you just file that failure to file and then you get to October, you've already had penalties and interest accrue.
So wait, can these any limit on these charges that grow over time? Is there any cap on this, or these things just keep on growing as time goes?
Well, as I said earlier, the failure to file penalty taps out at 25%, and I believe that the failure to pay penalty also caps out. I believe it's between 25 and 50%, but not the interest. The interest is going to continue.
Yeah, so that goes into perpetuity.
Well, no, they don't have forever to collect the tax. So normally it's 10 years from the date the tax is assessed, but it does go into perpetuity for that 10-year period.
So how does entering a resolution plan affect these amounts?
Well, the interest is going to continue at the current rate, but the failure to pay penalty is cut in half once you have an agreement set up with the IRS.
So we always talk about common mistakes, in each of these episodes. So what is a common mistake that people make that increase these penalty costs?
Well, I think we talked about this from the outset. I mean, the biggest one that I could tell people, other than filing all the forms that need to be filed, and maybe you need to hire professional help to make sure that that's done, because these small business owners, I mean, this is like Greek to a lot of small business owners, but it doesn't matter. If you're the owner of the business, you have a fiduciary obligation to figure all this out. So I know it's going to cost you some money, but you're better off all the time hiring somebody that does this every single day. So pay the bucks to get a professional and make sure it's done right. But the other piece of advice, the other piece of advice, and we talked about this at the beginning, but I can't stress this enough. When you prepare the return and you see you have liability and you can't pay it, don't delay in filing the return, because that tax liability is going to mushroom to 25% of the raw tax more simply for the failure to file penalty. So send that tax return in regardless.
We always talk about it, or we at least try to fit it in each episode, about advice or any things you can give people. But what can you tell them about, stopping these charges before they kind of overwhelm the person?
Well, pay your tax bill, because once you have that tax liability out there, those penalties are going to continue to go on. And so you may be eligible for some of these abatement of penalty programs, but there's no guarantee of that. So you need to get your ducks in a row. You need to hire a professional. You need to get an agreement, because at least at that point, the failure to pay penalty is cut in half.
Lance Drury, sir, it's a pleasure as always.
Thank you, Evan. Always great to see you.
And thank you all for watching at home. IRS debt doesn't just sit there, it grows. If you're falling behind, visit lancedrurylaw.com to take back control before things escalate.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.